I'm Jolynn Thomas, a journalist and longtime resident of Idaho Falls. I've covered the tragedy of Angie Dodge's murder for many years. When it comes to this case, there are a lot of details that continue to haunt me. Chris Tapp, an Idaho Falls resident, was convicted of this horrific crime based on statements he made to police. But a crucial detail bothered many who followed the trial. Tapp's DNA didn't match evidence left at the crime scene, and he could have walked free if he would have named the person whose DNA did match. Either he would not or could not name his supposed accomplice. That didn't ring true, so Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, began to dig further. She examined all of Tapp's statements in great detail. What she learned is shocking. Experts in police investigations share her conclusion. Tapp's statements are nothing more than the desperate pleadings of a frightened young suspect being manipulated. He knows nothing about this brutal crime. Please take a moment and watch this short video put together by volunteers. We want to take you through this story so you can begin to understand why we find this case so troubling. The nightmare began on June 13th, 1996, when 18-year-old Angie Dodge was found murdered in her Idaho Falls apartment. She had been stabbed and partially disrobed. Her killer left a complete DNA profile at the crime scene. This profile has never been matched to anyone.
This is a disorganized sexual homicide. The FBI has investigated or consulted on hundreds, if not thousands, of these types of cases over the years. They typically involve a lone offender, that is a single offender, who approaches in sort of a blitz-style attack, that is the immediate application of physical force to control the victim. And typically that type of offender may be acquainted with the victim, but the victim may or may not be acquainted with the offender. So it's a very loose sort of relationship typically in these cases. And that's one of the reasons this offender has really been off the radar screen. They have looked at the close friends and associates and quote-unquote logical suspects, and they've all been ruled out. This is someone who is off the grid, off the radar screen, and whose DNA has not been tested to date.
Police were under a great deal of pressure to solve this horrific crime, but they had no idea who did it. Then, about 6 months after Angie was murdered, one of her friends was arrested in Nevada on a rape charge. Ben Hobbs had used a knife to control his victim.
Ben Hobbs is the one and only suspect, but the problem is he's in jail in Nevada. So the police bring in Chris Tapp, a friend of Hobbs. They're hoping that Tapp might implicate Ben in the crime. Over time, they tell him they got good evidence that Angie was killed by Ben Hobbs. They tell him that Ben Hobbs is down in Nevada, actually accusing Tapp of being involved in the murder. And then they put him through a polygraph, and they tell him that he failed the polygraph, that he knows something about the crime. The machine never lies. And they actually accuse him or tell him that he could be charged as a conspirator. Listen to what Sergeant Furman tells Tapp during the first polygraph examination.
Right now, Chris, you can be charged with conspiracy, which means basically Idaho law states that if you're convicted of conspiracy, you take the same punishment and the same fall as if you actually did commit the crime itself.
Chris Tapp resisted at first. He insisted that Hobbs and Angie Dodge had been friends, and he wasn't aware of any friction between them. He swore up and down he knew nothing about the murder.
I mean, I'm going to be straight up and truthful with you. If I did anything know about this, I would say, but I do not know. That's honest truth. I'm not lying. I'm not going to shave his ass. It's not even trying to save my ass anymore. It's just going to bring out the truth.
Police didn't want to hear that Chris Tapp didn't know anything, so they kept up the pressure while offering him an immunity agreement in exchange for accusing Hobbs. Tapp knuckled under. He said Hobbs told him he had committed the murder, and he wrote out a statement to that effect.
Chris Tapp went through 9 interrogations and 7 polygraphs over a 3.5-week period. I have spent hundreds of hours studying these recordings. It is obvious Tapp knows nothing about the murder or who did it. The law has a simple test for validating a confession. Does the person know something that only a person at the crime scene would know? In the next clip, Tapp is unsure of where Angie's apartment was located.
Didn't she like live on the corner, or was it? It was the middle of the block.
Now, throughout the entire interrogation process, police behaved as therapists, trying to be helpful. They convinced Tapp that his memory was playing tricks on him. Tapp believed he had an immunity agreement to protect himself no matter what he said. So, he reluctantly went along with whatever stories police devised.
Until we get it all out, your pain's going to be there.
And see, that's my problem. I don't know if my pain is because I just pictured myself there. You know, when he's telling the stories. I don't know if I pictured myself there or if I was downstairs. I just don't know. Even my mind, you know, I just don't remember that. I wish I could.
On January 17, 1997, halfway through the Tapp interrogations, the case fell apart. The state lab informed the police that neither Ben Hobbs nor Chris Tapp matched the DNA left at the crime scene. At that point, the police manipulate Tapp to accuse a third man, Jeremy Sargis, of leaving the DNA at the crime scene.
All of the evidence in this case points to a lone offender. The police misinterpreted this evidence, thinking they were looking for multiple offenders, but the evidence itself, when viewed independently and objectively, supports the conclusion that a single offender was involved in this crime.
10 days after Chris Tapp named Jeremy as the third man, Jeremy's DNA comes back from the state lab, and it's not a match.
Eventually, Chris Tapp yielded to every accusation made against him by police, but he still couldn't name the person who left DNA at the crime scene. So, prosecutors revoked his immunity agreement and charged him with murder. They believed that they could probably get a conviction and declare a partial victory. That's exactly how this case played out. An innocent man was locked up and a killer escaped justice.
Unless a person goes over all the interrogations and the polygraph sessions, it's hard to understand why Tapp would play along with this even after his immunity agreement was revoked. The answer lies in the mix of threats and promises, especially during the polygraph sessions.
You're already there. You're already looking at the possibility of getting charged with murder 1, which max penalty is death, or minimum penalty is life imprisonment with no parole.
My impressions after watching the Chris Tapp video of the interrogation and polygraph examinations were that, 1, he was never really given a polygraph test, and 2, that the polygraph was used here as a psychological rubber hose in an effort to coerce a confession.
Tapp is told he needs to save himself from the death penalty by saying Ben Hobbs threatened to kill him unless he stabbed Angie. Tapp was worn down, susceptible to suggestion.
I'm a cop. I shouldn't be saying this. But I'm kind of close to you. I've got to know you. And you're not an asshole. You're not one of these crumbs that could go out and do that purposely. But you gotta protect you gotta save your life. Period. You gotta save your life. Sure, you got deeply involved. You got forced into doing something you didn't want to do.
What we see in this clip is a continuation of what we see throughout these recordings. The police officer is using psychological coercive tools to try to get a confession. When he says, "You've got to save your life," that's completely inappropriate.
What your hope is right now, and the only hope, is to get it out. Get it proven that, hey, I didn't want to. My God, I was stuck there and two guys were going to hurt me. They're going to kill me. I was afraid of my life. She was dying. I did this. Don't protect them just for that fact. I'm not talking about protect them so they don't get caught. Protect them so they don't get afraid they're going to say everything.
What we saw here is completely inappropriate in that it's inappropriate for a polygraph examiner to ever tell someone what they need to say to be truthful. Polygraph examiner is supposed to be an impartial arbiter of the credibility and truthfulness or deception of the subject, not to be an advocate for one outcome or another.
A team of police detectives worked on Tapp for weeks. They told him over and over again he might face the death penalty. At the same time, they said they wanted to help him, but they claimed they could only do so if he confessed to stabbing Angie.
The United States Supreme Court has held that if a person's free will is overcome by psychological pressure, his confession is coerced and not admissible. There's no doubt that Chris Tapp surrendered his free will to the investigators, who told him they would protect him and help him. Tapp's only real crime is he's gullible. He trusted and believed in the police and what they told him. Once Tapp had confessed to stabbing Angie, and he couldn't name this supposed third man who was there, the prosecution charged Tapp with murder, and upon conviction, they asked for the death penalty. The only evidence was a fabricated story that had been spoon-fed to Tapp by the police whom he trusted.
What police wanted to hear, of course, was the name of the person who left DNA at the crime scene. But Tapp had no idea who that person was. In fact, he had no real knowledge of the crime.
Chris Tapp has been wrongfully locked up since January of 1997. This case is a failure of the justice system in its most fundamental sense. Everything is upside down. An innocent man is behind bars, and a guilty man continues to walk the streets. This is a travesty of justice. Chris Tapp is completely innocent.
Whoever killed Angie Dodge, it was not Chris Tapp or his associates. They're innocent.
I'm here today because I want the killer of my daughter. I'm here today to tell you that Chris Tapp's DNA does not match the DNA collected at the crime scene. And forensic science has proven that Chris Tapp is not the killer of my daughter.
You know, we don't think about ourselves. We think of all the people that work so hard in trying to help Christopher. You don't know the conversations that we have. They says that Christopher and I have that says, "Mom, they're working so hard to get me out." He says, and they just doesn't seem like anything's working. And I just says, "Don't give up, Christopher. Something will prevail." I says, "They cannot continue doing what they're doing to you." But it's worse for Carol. I mean, the justice, that they have not given her justice.
I miss that physical touch. I miss walking up to her and holding her. And nobody could possibly understand that. So when you say you just need to move on, what road do you take? Because I've been on all of them, and the pain is still here 19 years later.
My husband, John Thomas, is Chris Tapp's attorney. John is leading an effort to appeal this wrongful conviction and get it overturned. This is the case that keeps both John and I awake at night. Two mothers are suffering. The sad reality is we can never return Angie to her mother, though we should try to bring some measure of comfort to Carol Dodge. We, the public, should demand that investigating authorities make a better effort to solve this crime. Let's act together as a community to face the truth and do the right thing.